All right. Hey, guys. Here we are in our question and answer period of Wrong End of the Snake. We got Tater back with you. We got Tim Shaner back with us. Let's run down a couple of these questions, and we sure do appreciate that you guys are asking them while we're talking. This comes from Samuel. Samuel says he's been in this situation a handful of times as an SE on tours where the engineer wouldn't show up until soundcheck or even showtime. And he'd find himself building his front of house, doing the line checks, mixing the sound check, in addition to the typical system engineer tasks related to the PA. Have you been in this situation, Tim, with an artist or an engineer, and what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I have. I've definitely been sort of on both sides of that with the guy that wants to touch every nut and bolt of his rig because he knows that he's ultimately responsible for making it work during the show. And then I've also worked with the guy that goes, "Oh yeah, dude, you got this. You got this all day. I'll just show up for the show." It's one of those things where I don't have a big opinion either way, if that makes any sense. I would like to know the nuts and bolts of the front of house rig so that if something does go awry and the mixer can't leave his chair, that I understand how it's patched and how it's labeled. So just to speak to that, I don't mind being the person who plugs it in every day because I know that if I've done it, I know the first steps in troubleshooting.
That's a lot of work though. Like, are you, I mean, you know, all of a sudden you're doing two guys' jobs, in my opinion. I mean, you know me, I like to set up front of house and tear it down. But I think there's something you said there that's really important in that there are some system guys that have no idea how my rig works. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't think that's right either. Like, that guy should know where all the inses and gazoutas are.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we're going back to the whole idea that as far as audio, we're all a team, and that come what may, come hell, come high water, the idea is that we're all a team, then I don't think that the team could exclude any one person from having at least a cursory understanding of how things go together, so that if someone is indisposed, or if say I'm walking the room, I'm walking the room during the middle of the show, what happens if the PA goes dead silent and it still takes me 7 minutes just to get back to front of house? I mean, 7 minutes of no audio during a show is huge.
Oh man, 20 seconds of no audio is huge.
Yeah.
Can I elaborate on this question? I've worked with some front of house engineers before, not naming any names, that never do the line check. Can you tell me where they are and what they're doing at that time?
Well, what I definitely could not speak to, maybe Pooch would have a better idea of it. I can't speak to where they are and what they're doing. I also, I guess maybe selfishly I struggle with that because so much of it comes down to mic placement. And if the origin of the input isn't correct, that's going to be really difficult to troubleshoot come 8 p.m. when the headliner hits the stage.
Great answer, Tim. That's why we had you on. Great answer.
That's great. Why we had you on. Yeah. I mean, you know, the personally for me as a mixer, I don't understand not doing a line check because I want to hear every single input and know that it sounds the same. I know exactly what my inputs sound like in headphones. How can I expect someone else to know that, right? I mean, suppose the input is working, but it sounds weird.
I also think, me and Pooch do, at least we share a stage rack, right? So I've done tours where I'm controlling the gain, tours where he's controlling the gain, but we're pretty particular on those gains and where they're at and settings, and we love to be sure they're spot on. So I don't know if I'd trust anybody in my book to do that. You know what I mean?
I mean, I know there's guys that do it, right? And obviously, Tim, you've run into that. But I just, it doesn't work in our workflow, in Tater and my workflow, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, talking of that on Travis Scott, for instance, the person who had control of the gain, the person who had control of the head amp was not us at front of house.
Right.
And that made a consistent product very difficult from a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
So there's a lot of trust that goes in there, and maybe if a system engineer's worked with the same front of house mixer for the last decade and they can speak for each other and all the rest of it, then go for it, right? But at the end of the day, I as you said, Pooch, and you nodded along, Tater there, you have a personal relationship with the artist more often than not, and they're going to call you on the carpet, not me, if something isn't what it's supposed to be. So, take that as you will. I mean, taking ownership of what you're doing, I think, is very important.
Let's see. We got another question here from Aaron, and he's talking about, hey, Tim, how do you approach shows that are in the round? Oh, so I've mixed a tour of In the Round with Jay-Z, and I tell you what, man, I had two of the best system engineers in the world, Phil Kriz and Adam, out there. Adam mixes Kiss and Motley Crue and all kinds of bands. He's an amazing mixer, but he's also an amazing system engineer. So I had two hotshot guys and myself, and we still struggled. So tell us a little bit, Tim. He also says, the guy who asked the question says, how often, if ever, can you get a word in during initial production design? And specifically, how do you manage sub-information for bands that want sub-information on stage, but still need to provide even coverage? So that's a lot of answers.
A lot to unpack there. Holy crap.
Yeah. But go for it.
Well, I guess I'll start with the in the round system, right? As a young system engineer, I cut my teeth with Fish, and when they play an arena, they're in the round, and we're talking lots and lots of hangs of PA that aren't turned up very loud, but the
excuse me one sec, Tim, is it end stage in the round, or is it center stage in the round?
It's end stage in the round.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've also done the center stage in the round and or end stage that is played like a center stage in the round, things like that. There's let's see, there's a lot of things when it comes to time aligning that system that are unique to each deployment. It's kind of really difficult to even explain unless you can use a lot of visualizations and understand what your main stereo pair looks like, and whether or not that's even pointed at your front of house mixer. For example, on the weekend, we had basically 3 sets of stereo pairs that were meant to operate sort of autonomously from each other. So then the 0 point for that rig was set-ish the middle of the thrust. Because if you started trying to time it like a main side rear, then you would end up with crazy amounts of delay and then phasing issues and all kinds of it across your left-right that's meant to be pointing towards either house left or house right bowl. So yeah, I think for each in the round system, it's most important for the system engineer to understand the design aspects of the system itself and what the end product wants to be. And I guess then that leads me to the next question: how often do I get pulled in early enough
to make that?
Yeah, to have a say.
To have a say.
And honestly,
or not necessarily you, but let's say Claire Brothers, do they get pulled in? Maybe you don't even know you're the system tech on yet. Is Claire in on that, and when do they get involved?
Oh, that's a really good question as well, because one of the tours I did a couple of years ago, I'm not going to use any names because this one gets a little sideways pretty quickly, but in the middle of the design process, it was decided it was going to be in the round. And so then it was
end stage 270, and then they said, oh, by the way, now
we're going to move the stage out to the middle of the arena floor, and now it's in the round, and audio has 108-foot cable bridges per side, and all this extra cable, and it still has to fit on one truck.
No,
that was the best bit. It still had to fit on one truck.
Not going to happen. Wow.
Yeah, so a lot of times, when we're talking about the established artists, even if they're sort of young in the industry, comparatively speaking to the legacy acts, if we're talking about an in the round tour, there's so many other design aspects that come from that, as far as all the pretty things that people get to look at that have nothing to do with speakers. So usually Claire or any other audio house would be pulled in pretty early, so that the big black ugly speakers aren't blocking the pretty lights and the pretty video screen. So yeah,
that is funny because when I started, you basically had these huge walls of sound on each side, right? S4s and Prism and MT4 covering all that stuff. Now we've got these two little tiny line of sticks, and these guys are still complaining about it. It's like, what more can we do? It's funny.
You'll never get away with that. If they could make speakers be all the way up in the ceiling, they would.
I think they'd all love. I think the show designers just really want a silent disco thing going on, but that's a lot of headphones to hand out.
Yeah, a lot of cleaning.
Yeah. I mean, I know in my experience in the one tour that I did that was in the round, it was center stage in the round. We kind of did the same thing that you were talking about with the weekend, where there was 4 zones all the way around the thing. So it was like we treated it as if there was a left right here, a left right here, a left right there,
and where were you mixing from in that tour?
I was in the center of one of those left rights on the floor, like at where the dasher is on the VOM. So I was closer than I want to be most of the time, but still had stereo imaging, and so that I would conceded to that because I had the stereo imaging going on. But I know that the timing of that was so crazy, like every day getting all the flown subs to be all working together. That was a crazy thing. And you know what? It's coming. It's just like, every production manager in the world puts a thrust in front of their artist. Every artist in the world thinks it's super cool to have a center stage, so anyway, it's difficult, but thanks for answering that. I think, also that in my experience, it was Jay-Z, and there was months of discussion prior to production rehearsals about the PA design, like that Claire Brothers had, people way fucking smarter than me figuring out how to deploy that to make it sound the best. And even at that, when they deployed it during production rehearsals, the head of the design team was there even, just to see that it all went down. Anyway, cool. Great question.
Was there a third part that I missed? Or did we get all of those parts? That was a lot to unpack there.
It was, wasn't it? I think basically the last part of the question was about managing sub information for bands that don't want sub information on stage, but still need to provide coverage in a center stage scenario. So I guess they're asking, how do you manage all that sub information when it's all being, blown in a 360 kind of a way? Do you have anything to speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to deployment and working within set parameters, because like we mentioned earlier, show designers would just prefer that we weren't there. We're a necessary evil a lot of times. So specifically speaking with the weekend, we had 2 end-fire arrays, sub-arrays that were flown a sort of center house that both pointed straight out from each other, that worked really well for that application. And so I think when it comes to in the round specifically, it's really important the way that you deploy it, and not try to fix that then with either putting some delay on a couple of cabinets or trying to EQ it back out. I think it's really important that everybody involved understands that the deployment comes first, and then turning it up comes second, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I think it's really important that when you talk about this stuff, in general, most productions don't allow us to put our subs where we floor subs anyway, where we want to put them. There's always something else that needs to be there, a video platform or something, or a lighting piece or whatever. But what they don't understand is it's important in a regular kind of end stage, but it is so important in when you're talking about mixing in the round, as to where exactly those subs are and the equidistant amount around the stage. So I think a lot of this is about education and educating the production manager and educating the show designer about our needs as a sound guy, and not folding on that shit. Like being the system engineer that says, guys, I know that you need this space for a camera platform, but I'm telling you, this is a detrimental thing to audio. If you don't care about audio, then fine. But I'm telling you, you know what I mean? It needs to be that strong. And
I think a lot of people, I don't know, I may be using the wrong word, but forget that come to shows that so many choices are made not on your behalf. Like,
oh, true.
I'll see people critiquing stuff. I would never do it that way, and I never do it that way. Well, they're not in on the planning of this and how many times you get shot down, especially being in audio, because it doesn't look right. You know, I got guys coming to me saying I can't have my antennas for my ears and wireless mics because those two little fins are ruining the look. And it's like, people don't realize how many other obstacles there are when you're trying to do the optimum thing. It never works that way. It's so much compromise involved, and the larger the tour, the more compromises that are made.
Yeah,
definitely.
Absolutely. Cool. Let's take just one more question. Do you find any differences in the way systems are deployed in different continents and countries? North America versus Europe versus Asia. Do you find that there's different kind of deployments in those countries?
They all point the speakers at the audience, right?
Yeah, definitely soft side towards the audience.
Yeah, okay.
Speakers out.
Goodness,
Laces out.
I guess I'm sort of at a loss because I don't. A good number of our PAs are actually built in Europe, and then those companies are very, very good at training people on how to use them. And I think that's half the point. I think the idea is that if you've got a D&B rig, an L Acoustics rig, a Claire rig, or an Adamson rig, or whatever it happens to be, the person that's sent out with it understands enough about it that the mixer is going to have the same experience with that rig as they did the last time they used an identical rig.
I think what the person was maybe getting at, and I don't know, but, you know, I've showed up to a European festival, for instance, where it is like 150 subs. You know what I mean? And it's like we end up going in there and like turning, you know, subs down by like 12 dB because they think either that it looks better or that it is more efficient, or maybe they think that there are mixers that are going to show up that their mixes are sub deficient. I don't know. I think that maybe that person was getting at that. Do you find the deployment to be different, let's say in festival situations, America versus Europe versus Asia?
No, I wouldn't say that necessarily. Okay. I would say that companies definitely deploy a system for a festival differently than they would for an A-market arena tour or a stadium. With the idea being that you have no idea how the system's going to be used. So traditionally at a festival specifically, they will over deploy. Like you said, 8 million subs across the front and yada, yada, yada. And then your average normal front of house mixer is going to be turning everything down and all the rest of it. I think the festivals are their own beast because you never really know who's going to be using that PA. So you'd rather put a bigger engine in the car than it needs. If that
no, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. Cool.
I'd like to elaborate that on a bit, though. You know, US to Europe, I'll agree with that. But when you start going to smaller countries and the promoter has a relationship with the one L Acoustics provider, right? And they never have quite enough, right?
No, you're right.
That's interesting.
They got to get a little bit more from the one they don't want to deal with. It's always hard to get that little bit more because they don't deal with that vendor. And in those regions, the promoters seem to have one vendor they like to steer you into that they're probably in bed with, right? That's their buddy. So sometimes in those smaller countries, that's a little harder to get that exact one you want, usually.
No, you're right, definitely.
You have to make some compromises again.
Yeah, especially if there's, say, if there's less tours that go there, you know, say your countries in Asia and or in Africa. I mean, they just don't see as many shows as we've got.
Yeah.
And so they can't support the rental houses that we can. And then there is the relationship between the promoter and the local audio house. And there may only be one audio house. A couple of years ago, we were in Kiev, and there were 5 different audio houses represented in our 6,300 seat arena. One guy brought the stage left main hang, and another company brought the stage right main hang. I mean, so yeah, you're definitely going to run into that kind of thing. But as far as the way that the system was deployed, it was deployed to the best of their ability with the gear that they had in a way that that didn't make you go, well, why'd you do that? If that makes any sense.
I've actually been in a situation where two different companies, rather than doing what's right and intermixing what they had to make it the right deployment, they drew a line, and stage right PA is this company and stage left PA is this company. And both of them had this, whose dick is bigger fighting match, and put me in the middle of a stereo whose dick is bigger. It was horrible.
Well, let me guess. Left and right sounded exactly the same right off the bat, right?
They did not sound the same. Yeah, I mean, it was the same type of PA, just deployed like totally differently. Like they didn't listen to what the other guy was doing on the other side. So it was.
Oh, that's insane. Yeah, that's absolutely insane. I mean,
it was. Anyway, all right, Tim. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming, dude, and taking your time and
thanks for having me. It's
sharing
been great.
Your knowledge, and we sure do appreciate you. And we hope that both of us hope that we get to do a tour soon with you.
Yeah,
I'm just hoping to do a tour.
I'm just hoping to do a tour too. Jeez. Anyway,
then we'll get into specifics.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning into the Wrong End of the Snake. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, cheers.